Also, this year is the 40th anniversary of Japan's #1. Now looking back, during a half century about Asian story. First is Japan Miracle, the story, then Four Little Dragon,
Yes.
then China story.
Yeah.
You are so good at picking topic. What's the secret? Yeah.
Why I picked them? Part of it is luck, because
Once is luck, two times maybe luck, but so many years.
First of all, I tell you about Japan. You know, before I went to Japan, I had about 1 year when I knew I would likely go there. So at that time, there were not many good social science studies. So I tried to read all different disciplines. I read history, economics, political science, tried to get a broad background. And then I tried to find some particular study where I could go deeper. I'm not a historian. My PhD thesis was on families of Irish American, Italian American, old American families, and emotionally disturbed children. So when I started out in Japan, I first started to study mental health of children. But then one day, one of my Japanese families said, you know, there's a difference between salarymen and other families. And that lit up a light. That's really interesting. It's a sort of openness to the big ideas. The new middle class did not mean they just got rich. It meant that the structure of those families' life when they worked for a big organization was very different from the independent business people. So as a whole structure became a new topic. So on the way to Japan, I visited, my wife and I had never traveled abroad. So we went to see the world. So in those days, you could get an airplane ticket and stop in every country. And when I went to England, this is 1958, there were still many rubbles on the street from World War II bombing. And Japan was already cleaned up. It was very poor. Even the main streets of Tokyo, to me, were like alleys. But they were working very hard. I knew some of the facts, but I never thought about what's the big picture. I think the big picture is going from a structure where you had clans in Japan to a broader administrative structure. The transition from an organization of clans working together to a broader administrative state that has its own structure and ideology and so forth. And once I could see that broader perspective, a lot of the details fell in place. So that was my first book that ended New Middle Class. And then from 1960 until 75, I did not spend, I went every year, but not do it for a long time. 75 to 76, I went back for a whole year. When I was there, I realized, whoa, Japan is really coming up. And it has the potential for having much bigger impact on the world. And I'll give you an example of one country, and I think it was Peru. I talked to a local guy who he started out as the dealer for a Japanese motorbike. He was so amazed at how rational the Japanese were, how hard they worked, and how they maintained quality, that he learned how to do modern quality, and he influenced some other people. That's when I began writing Japan as #1. So maybe I hadn't thought about it this way. If I say, what's my pattern of picking a big thing? It's I start from, what is interesting, and then I say, oh, here's a big picture, and it's a kind of a new thing. I guess that maybe is my secret, that I keep thinking intellectually, and then I say, what is the big picture, and how does it fit together? What's really important is happening, and I suddenly hit on that, and that I think the big books I wrote, Japan is #1, and Dumb, really came from that. Yeah.
And I'm so curious how to keep your, energy, keep your ambition. Still try to engage something big. So, what's the motivation?
Well, I'm not very happy in the United States what happened to political science and sociology. In the last 20, 30 years, they want to be scientific. And they can use new quantitative measures. Get a sample of 5,000 and this is correlated to this. But from my point of view, they don't do enough to see what is the context and what is the social background, what is the history. So the kind of research that I like, where you really get to know people and see historical context and see broad context, is not so popular. The other thing is universities now have become too bureaucratic. We have so many problems with females, how you handle females, and how you handle blacks and transgender. So the dean, instead of thinking just scholarly, spends so much time worrying about social issues, which are important, but from trying to build an intellectual vitality. Their mind is so busy with so many different things like this. So, of course, in the whole world, I would say one of the fundamental differences is people become so detailed. They do not see the big picture. There are so many talented people who lost their confidence about civilization.
You said before that you study other countries because you want to use others' experience to maybe enlighten United States.
Yes.
During the past 5 decades, you travel deeply into China and Japan.
Yes.
So what's the major things you want to bring to United States, to Americans?
Well, unfortunately, they don't listen enough. If I really want to try to make America, if I really had power and really want to have fundamental, I think the experience of the countries that were late developers, where the country takes a more active role in trying to guide the whole country, would be really good. For example, we have good suburbs that have good schools. In poor neighborhoods, we have very poor schools, very poor teachers. If you had a national Ministry of Education, you would really try to have a national program, and you would have federal money, national money, to help the backward schools. So you would have a much more equal educational system. So if I really had power and really want to use the example of Japan and China, I would say the government should take a much more active role. But I'm afraid America can't do that. I mean, we're not a late developer, and now people have too much pride. But in some ways, I think my vision is bigger. I mean, it's a very important intellectual task for the whole world. The grand vision, like Toynbee in the West had a big grand vision, and maybe some earlier period had a grander vision. But I think now people are not looking forward enough. For example, the bureaucrats I knew in the 1950s, that generation who were thinking how you build a modern Japan were really very broad. And the bureaucrats now are much pettier. They've become too small. I think that there are historical changes in different time periods. Whether you have a broad vision makes a big difference. For example, humiliation could be used in different ways. It could be used as a stimulus to study and to learn more, to build a modern organization. The Meiji is, as I say, it's a modernization program and an integrated program, and succeeded, but then they had years of disaster. In the 1930s, they had taught patriotism so successfully that the leaders could not control it. And the defeat by the United States was so devastating, and they suffered so much. And then they had to revise, and now they have to accept a new role in the world. I mean, in a way, it's not so glorious. Japan must accept China as number one in Asia, and America is a much greater, bigger country. They can be a modern country, but it's not so exciting. how to adjust to this new world. They don't have a clear vision. I think in China also, China is new powerful, and they have not yet become comfortable with their power. Now when they go to many other countries, some of the instinct is, look, we're the big shot, please listen to us. There are some people like that, and some other people say, now to get along as we expand, we cannot be too proud. That is a good way. But my impression is that they use a lot of slogans, but they haven't tried to be systematic. They did not have an overall systematic plan about learning from the world in every single area. Geography, local customs, the value system, the religion, the family structure, how to persuade and how to have deep understanding of people, their deeper feelings. For example, in the United States, propaganda is not a good way to persuade Americans. In the long run, this will not succeed very well. So they do not have yet the mature vision about how to adapt to the rest of the world as they grow. From America's point of view, I think after World War II, in a way, it was kind of a peak. We were the one great country in the world with modern industry. And now China will surpass America in some places. And we don't have a plan. I think our leaders, they have an instinctive reaction from the Cold War. We won't let another country pass. And a lot of people in Washington just want to criticize China, jump on China. But they don't have a vision of how to work with China now. I mean, from my point of view, human civilization is not just about business interests, economic growth, or new technology breakthrough. It's a broader conception. It's a kind of an intellectual development of trying to think the big picture of what is happening.
You mentioned the public intellectual tradition. In 1960s, 70s, and until 80s, public intellectual play a very important role in understanding other countries. Now it become more marginal. There is a deeper problem. I mean, comparing with the older generation, people think not curious about different behavior, mentality of others, civilization. We are very self-centered. From your perspective, how to deal with?
I don't know the answer. I wish I knew. I think it has to do with the new connection between communication and so forth. But what will be the basis of healthy relations? It's true. I mean, in the last 20 years, the world became chaotic. And out of the chaos, people went off in different directions, so I don't know that answer. But I think what I can do, and maybe have some impact, I hope, is how to deal with China. And there's some things Americans may not like about what's going on in China. But you have to be realistic. After all, China is going to be strong. And there are a lot of good Chinese people you can work with.
If John King Fairbank alive, what would he do?
In a way, he did not have such a broad goal as I do. He wanted to have better relations with China, but his vision was more in terms of the field of Chinese studies. I would say one of the fundamental differences with Fairbank and me is he was elitist. He was from higher class than I, and more. He went to Oxford and Rhodes Scholar and so forth. And I was more a 普通人. You know, my father was a small Jewish merchant, and I worked in the store. And my father had very good attitude of trying to get along with everybody and to become very familiar and very friendly. It was a town of about 10,000, and the small college, Ohio Wesleyan, which is a Methodist town, maybe partly because it was a religious town. There were many Christians there, although I was Jewish. It gave me a sense that I want to be friends with everyone. And it also was World War II. So we had friends who went to the war. We knew people who died during the war. My generation after the war, we really wanted to have world peace. And in some ways, I feel I'm so lucky. I grew up in such small town America. I was given the opportunity to experience so many historical changes. And that to me means so much responsibility. Not because I thought that was so important, but because I thought the relations were so bad, and I really want to make. I mean, that's the honest way. I really want those people to get along, because there's so many good people in both countries, and there ought to be a better way. And I knew a lot of people. I want them to get along. So maybe I'm immodest. Maybe I'm not correct, but I think I have a contribution to make.
So, do you think, I mean, there was a golden age between China and the United States, but now we have so many different complexes between each other. So, I mean, the transition, how the transition happened, it's...
Of course, every country like China and the United States is big, and we have many different people. The extreme rightists, the extreme leftists. They don't have the confidence and the vision to really develop a understanding of each other. So how to find a new path. I'm afraid it could be so hard in the near future. But, well, it's also, I think of the missionaries. I'll give you one example. I knew a Guangdong, a guy named Yang Mai.
The exchange with people whose experiences are different from one's own is very illuminating. There are other ways to think. And I think that right now, that kind of attitude in this country is so necessary. Right now in the US, we are so divided that we cannot come to the middle. I mean, Ezra wrote China and Japan Facing History. Somebody needs to write the book now. America, right and left, facing history. Maybe I'll write that. No. But no, it's people are so closed-minded. And the sad thing is, it's not just the other side, it's one's own side. We're not willing to even talk. When Trump won the election, I was surprised, but I immediately looked for all the books that I could find that related to what the other side might be thinking or experiencing, and that might contribute to my understanding of why this was happening.
Yeah.
And I spoke to a good friend. Oh, I'm reading this and that and the other thing and trying to understand the other side. And she just looked at me and said, why would you want to understand the other side? They're all racists. End of story. And this is an intelligent person whose opinion I normally respect. And she's still my very good friend. But why would I even try to understand another side? Surprised her. People are just absolutely closed. We don't need that. We don't need that in the same country. We certainly do not need that between China and the US. People need to understand why there are different points of view and how can you find a middle ground. I mean, we both sincerely wish people could listen to other people and respect their opinions, or at least understand them.
So you discuss the issue with Ezra a lot? Very often?
Well, I wouldn't say a lot. I mean, we're sitting there at the kitchen table. I'm reading the Boston Globe. He's reading the New York Times. Now I have to read the New York Times myself. And I'll say, oh, did you see this story on blah, blah, blah? Or Trump is doing X, Y, Z. Yeah, we would discuss them like that. Or something terrible. I am so glad, it's just going to sound stupid. I'm so glad he didn't see January 6th. It would have broken his heart.
recently, I always think of Yang Mai. This is a guy who went to Yenjing University and graduated in the late 1940s. He was studying Western economics, a free market economics. In 1949, he knew, oh boy, I will never get ahead. I will fail. So he became an engineer. So from 1949 until early 1980s, he had no 作用，没有发挥作用. But in Guangdong at the time of the late 80s, because he knew how markets operated.
Suddenly he's useful now.
Exactly. So suddenly, he would go to a county, and the guy in the county say, how do we get enterprise here? So he played a very useful, constructive role, and he was my friend. He was my good friend in Guangdong, and I learned a lot from him. In the whole world, there are so many talented people. Sometimes they have no chance, it's sad, but they never. But sometimes some of those people have a chance later. So when I hear people say engagement didn't work, I say it's crazy. History is not ended today. Some of those people who had very good understanding, now they must be very careful. But maybe 10 years later, they could play a very constructive role in development around the world. And now it would need to be organized and to give them more opportunity, more freedom to develop bigger ideas. So I won't give up.
All right, you want to see where he worked. All right.
Yeah, his working room.
Here is the basement study. Pick that up. I'll put some lights on. Okay, so this is the place. This is where he worked. This is only part of it. Tons of books are in another part of the basement. And as you can see, it leaves a lot to be desired. Here's his machine. Where are the lights? Good God. I'm not sure I should tell you this, but he had the draft of the paper that he was preparing as part of a Harvard package that was to go to the next administration. Now that means Biden, but it could have been somebody. So he decided more recently that he wanted to work more on Chinese because he did feel an obligation. And he had a scheduled appointment with tutors on December 19th. But unfortunately, he died on December 20th. She called, she didn't understand why he hadn't answered. She just didn't think of that. Ezra passed away. All right, here we go. Well, these are supposed to work so that, ideally he would sit here, he would look out, he would see this plant, and then he would be able to see the area there. He didn't really make much use of the view. Usually this was just kept closed.